1 p.m. Tuesday, September 17th, I will call the Affordable Housing Trust Fund meeting to order. Currently have a quorum. We're short 2 members, Rita Higgins and Charity Grace. Look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So, go ahead.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Item number 3 on the agenda, the approval of the minutes for July 29th and August 13th.
Are we holding this? We're holding July 29th isn't available. That was our meeting within the neighborhood first meeting. Waiting for those minutes to be approved because they're a part of ours.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Right, so we'll carry the July 29 minutes to the next meeting for approval. So I'll look for a motion to carry that and approve the August 13th minutes.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Carried unanimously. Item number 4, application for closing cost assistance for 5 Chuck Hollow Road.
My one question, there's already a covenant on this property?
Yes. There is, yeah.
Great.
And these guys passed all the qualifications through Housing Nantucket. The house is qualified into the covenant program. They took the first-time homebuyer education class. They're being represented by Mike Wilson, and they're set to close at the end of the month.
Anybody have any more questions? For a motion?
I move to allocate $15,000 pending the final closing costs. I move to allocate $15,000 in closing cost assistance pending the final closing costs for this applicant.
Second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Item number 5. Tucker, I don't see Ann in the audience.
Maybe we want to postpone
Do you want
that.
to carry this later?
She's
May
planning
10th?
to be here.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we're just moving over. So we'll move that down. We'll hold that for later in the meeting. Hopefully I can make it to discuss. Item number 6, we have discussion on the budget. Chuck, if I can pass
Yeah.
you the spreadsheet.
Thank you very much. So everyone should have in front of you a discussion document around both planned spending for this year and getting ready to make a request of town administration with respect to the coming fiscal year. So I think maybe what I'm going to do is to start on the far right column and then work our way backward across the page. So you can see the right side of the page is related to this current fiscal year 20. The left side is related to fiscal year 21. The different sources of funding are shown at the top of the page. So Neighborhood First, the $20 million, which the advisory committee is working on making recommendations regarding. The town of Nantucket $1 original $1 million funding that we've been working our way through over some time. Then the third column, town of Nantucket Select Board $100,000. That's the usual funding, if you will, that the town administration and select board would be recommending year to year. Last year there wasn't an allocation under that, given other funding that was recommended and approved at this past year's town meeting. Then I've broken the CPC funding into two columns. The column with the A denotation is related to the $5 million bonding, and where those monies are really intended, and Ken Bogran, the real estate specialist, is here to correct this, wearing his CPC chair hat. But those funds were really allocated under the representation that they would be used toward acquisition of property for housing creation. So those are what I'm going to say separate to the P designation column, which is intended to mean programs. And so supporting construction of housing in Nantucket or habitat units, things of that nature, closing cost assistance at 80 and 100% level. The next column is really a placeholder for the housing bank or short-term rental tax revenue, to be determined in terms of allocation, but I think we should have a placeholder here. And finally, the CHIP program that Nantucket Cottage Hospital has put together, and funding that we've both received and have requested there. So, and please jump in at any point with any questions. So looking at this current fiscal year, we had received $50,000 in funding last year from the CHIP program for our closing cost assistance program at the 150 level and higher. We've made a request to the CHIP for this next year of $243,700, largely around the data analysis, dashboard, marketing and communications programming that we have planned for this year. So that sort of is accounted for both on the revenue and expense side in that column. Moving over, again, nothing in the housing bank or short-term rental tax category at this point. The CPC programming, we effectively have started the year based on recent previous years' allocations from the CPC with approximately $1.2 million in awards. You can see as you move down on the expense side, there's planned for both Housing Nantucket and Habitat projects that they have provided us some detail on in terms of what they would need to see through particular projects in their pipeline. As well, we are supporting our current 80 and 100% closing costs program from these funds. As you all will recall, with the recent acquisition of 7 Amelia, a portion of those funds are coming from the CPC. And therefore, we are, leaving ourselves with a net looking at next year with, just under 200,000 if everything were spent according to plan. So, moving over to the CPC acquisition, funding the $5 million bonding. The way it's simply been reflected here is there may be a portion of those funds that we might consider using to help facilitate, I think, in particular, Habitat for Humanity being able to clear its pipe of the next two homeowners that they have already selected. And so we'll get into that discussion a little bit more later on. But the point is, in terms of order of magnitude in our budgeting planning, some placeholder here for an effort of that manner. Yes?
A quick question.
Yeah.
The next two Habitat owners do not qualify for the shine list.
Yes. So Habitat has done a lot of work to try to comply with the DHCD requirements to get their units on the list, and they're fully prepared to do that going forward, except they already had selected their next two families and they need to change their system to comply with DHCD requirements. So there's no getting around unless they were to effectively revoke
Yep.
the offer to those two families, which I don't think anybody wants to do. The next two habitat units will not be on the SHI list.
But they do qualify for CPC funds.
Yes, yeah,
so
their
we
habitat
kind of-
homes
Right.
serve
Even
Right.
though,
at a level that
They're
would
not
qualify.
shy.
Yep.
Yep.
Sorry, Tucker, can you remind me, what is the 375,000?
So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the executive session part, but there could be an opportunity to assist Habitat with basically procuring some land that could help them clear their pipe. Yeah, yeah. So the next column, the town of Nantucket usual funding, you can see sort of where we started the year, and then we've basically built the usual budget items, if you will, under this funding. This is the funding that requires anything over 100,000 the select board would need to approve, and that's generally the case with everything. But I just pointed out as to some degree why we put the budget within this column. We've had the opportunity to look at some of the other departments that might be considered to be of comparable size within the town, and look at some of the planned expenditures that they have. And so this is built mindful of what those are, as well as trying to incorporate the feedback that this group has had to date on the need for consultants and professional services regarding evaluation of different opportunities and marketing and so forth. So, today I'm really hoping everyone is going to provide their thoughts and feedback. And, this is by no means obviously a finished product, but we thought this would be a good conversation document for today. Now, I guess the only other thing to say there is that the town is in the process of basically establishing what the town manager's been calling a housing office. So whether ultimately that office is set up like a regular department, like the health department or any other department, and these budgetary items would flow through a departmental budget, or they would flow through the trust. It's a little bit of form over substance, but I think we're trying to note them here so everyone is on the same page in terms of what the housing efforts need in order to make the kind of progress that we want to make. Does that make sense to folks?
yes.
So, happy to talk about any of the particular items. I won't go through each one at the moment. Dropping down to some of the program, this is where we have planned for the start of the covenant lot creation program, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and other continuation of clothing cost assistance. Those are items that would fall out of this funding bucket, if you will. Moving to the next column, the select board approval from the first dollar column. Really the only item in this current fiscal year that we have planned and gotten select board agreement on using these funds for is the recent acquisition of 7 Amelia Drive. So that leaves a balance in that bucket of 144, and then there is the neighborhood first, as we spoke about. we could put in, if you all thought we should start to put some shape around the different programs, we could put in some placeholders, but we kind of figured until the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee makes its recommendations about different programs and so forth, we're just simply noting those funds are there and will be, of course, at one point be recommended for use in particular manners. So looking at the next year, the left side of the page, fiscal 21, you can basically see, and I'll try to do this quickly, in the CHIP column, we're basically anticipating, and I apologize, there may be a error there, but
It's duplicated.
we're anticipating perhaps requesting another 50 for the 150 level of support for next year, and that should get noted further down in terms of expense. We might want to consider making a greater request if there's success with the covenant lot creation program. That certainly would make a lot of sense. No guarantee that the hospital will make that award, but something for consideration. Again, housing bank and short-term rental tax are a placeholder. Perhaps at this point, maybe we want to put in some expected revenue around the short-term rental here. Again, a discussion item. CPC, we have the starting balance. The request has been made with big kudos to Brooke and Rima and Megan on assembling a detailed application to the CPC for $800,000. You can see really the way that breaks down is it's intended to be supporting projects by Habitat and Housing Nantucket, as well the continuation of the closing cost assistance at 80 and 100% AMI. That's bumped up from the current year based on anticipation of some of the Richmond units coming online in particular next year, as well as Habitat having production increased. So with the $5 million funding, you all will recall that number has been kind of consistently in the last few budget documents we looked at as there have been several example opportunities you all have taken a look at, and so order of magnitude, this is meant to represent perhaps there would be moving forward with something in a vein like that. Town of Nantucket 100,000 budget, really same idea as the current year, but looking forward, and maybe things to point out are anticipated increase in maybe some of the professional services and consultants we're using as the Neighborhood First recommendations are made and evaluation and so forth is being done as well. We've got a communications and marketing budget in and of itself for next year. Now, I think it's important to re-emphasize that the marketing and communications portion of what we're planning on for this current year is really wrapped up in this CHIP application. So if the CHIP monies were not to be awarded, then the group needs to decide is those things that you feel are important to do in and of themselves anyway, and we need to figure out where those funds can come from to make them happen. That somewhat there are some buckets of money that exist that could help, solve that in this current year, but it would have an impact on what we were seeking in terms of budget allocation for next year. And that next Town of Nantucket $1 bucket with the 144 left is, one of those sources that could help fill the gap. finally neighborhood first, and we've talked about that. So I'm going to stop talking. I really want to hear from you guys.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are the asterisks at land acquisition? Where do those go?
Oh, sorry. Those were from a prior version.
So not relevant?
Not relevant.
How about
yeah.
Habitat for Humanity?
Same.
Okay,
Yeah. It just
great.
was an explanatory.
Didn't know if there was some secret I didn't see.
There are no secrets here.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that we have, under the Covenant Lot Creation Program, we have 100,000 allocated this year and 100,000 allocated next year. My hope is that that's it, because then it becomes a self-funding program, because there's an 18-month limit on having to repay the loan, so that then that money comes back with the accrued interest, and so that it's just a self-funding program going forward. So that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
My thoughts and feedback is based on the CHIP conversation is that communication and marketing seems light in the ask. If we wanted to,
Yeah.
if that doesn't come through.
Yeah.
And it's just light in general.
Yeah.
I think that's a spend through that'll happen pretty quick. And there's no, I don't know if a technology cost falls under market analysis and data, but is there a technology cost?
And what are you thinking of there?
Whether it's work on a website.
Pretty
or,
charts.
you know, yeah. There was some discussion about devices here 2 meetings ago, and I think we said we weren't interested in getting devices, but is that a bucket that we want to have some money in?
Sure, that definitely could be added. So I can mention that the market analysis data was in anticipation of, if the group is continuing, if the CHIP grant comes through and the group is continuing and wanting the data to be updated and so forth, there obviously be some ongoing costs associated with that as well. The following, in the original CHIP application, the server, you can say this better than I can, Brooke, the website services management is incorporated into the original application, but that's to the tune of roughly 30,000, and that would be an expense that would get shifted over that we have accounted for here, but would be taking away from some of the other categories.
Right.
Yes.
So the CHIP grant application basically is, our timing is, start the work at the beginning of the year, sort of have everything set up at the beginning of fiscal 2021, and then we've asked the CHIP group for the actual maintenance of all of that infrastructure that gets created, and additional, some marketing, some website maintenance, all of the stuff to keep it up and running for the first year, with the promise that our budget would absorb that ongoing maintenance cost
Going
forward from there. So basically, they're funding sort of the get up and go part of it, and then on an ongoing basis, it would become part of our operating budget.
How does that, in the CHIP grant, how does the 243 break out?
It's actually 150 for closing cost assistance and 193.7 for the housing, what we are calling the Housing Hub project, which includes both the data piece of it, the data dashboard that will be housed on the website, as well as the website itself, and a comprehensive marketing program to reach out to the community to tell them that this information is available to them.
Are those 3 categories broken out financially, or is it all kind of,
So,
if we were to line item them?
so actually, if you look at the actual below the very right-hand column,
The
you
usage.
see
Yeah.
it's sort of broken down. They're very integrated, so it's a little hard
Yeah.
to break it out as to who's doing what, because they're extremely integrated. But you can see the data piece is about $25,000. Then the actual, so the professional services and consultants is 30, and then communications and marketing is 138.7. So it either needs to be an extremely detailed breakdown,
Right.
or because the
Mesh.
2 subcontractors' work are very much integrated with each other.
I guess that, so to the point that there's 140 $4,000 in the $1 bucket, and if we look at the 138,700 under communications and marketing, that kind of burns through that.
Right.
Are the other numbers substantial enough to carry to carry the rest of that concept project
If we don't get the,
if we don't get the CHIP grant, and then but that doesn't leave us anything for any additional efforts.
Well, you're starting, based on the planned spending, in forgetting the large acquisition pools,
Right.
you are projecting having approximately $400,000 left over within two buckets that can be spent in a variety of ways with select board approval. So you have the funds available to fund all of what was applied for with the the CHIP program if that weren't to receive funding. But it will increase, of course, what you're looking for next year. Yeah.
And then the upkeep of what they're producing for that is somewhat included in the market analysis data budget.
So the 30,000
Yep.
is included in the 120.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, there's some in the 120 and some in that bottom line that's
Yeah.
30, so.
And then in about 2 years, we should expect that town of Nantucket 1 million. That's just a source that's gone.
I mean, it's kind of the first money we want to spend if we can, but we've just shown it this way right here. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that we should ask the select board for approval of things and consume that bucket and
Yeah.
just get it off here to simplify things. It also is the thing that requires approval at $1. So, so I think it's the least flexible funding that we have. And I would encourage us to plan ahead enough that we leave time for select board approval for whatever we're gonna use it for, and let's use it up.
Yeah.
Been a handy one so far, although once the infrastructure was taken out. I think for there to be this sort of collaborative effort between the two boards, and I think select board has seen sort of most focused on it when there's some sort of land acquisition. So I think just kind of keeping that in mind in terms of trying to anticipate what the board is thinking about and how we can support them. We always have their favor.
Okay.
Right.
Good advice.
More questions or comments?
Is it possible in the next few months to, because this structure and form is really clear and easy to read,
Okay.
if we could have actuals for
Yeah.
fiscal
Yes.
for
So
19 and 20 so far?
absolutely. So
yeah.
we've reached out to Brian Turbot and his team and had an initial meeting. We'd hoped to have updated numbers for today. They've not had an opportunity to
Okay.
yet.
As long as it's in the works.
No, it's in the works for sure. We really wanted them for today, but they're in the process of effectively creating what they call organizations within the accounting system that line up with these buckets, and reconciling the starting balances in each of those buckets. So these numbers will change a little bit, but at order of magnitude, they're close.
Great.
Anyone else? So you're not looking for an action item, just feedback on the document today?
So this is what I've heard, is that we probably want to make some provision for what if we weren't to receive the CHIP funding, particularly with regard to next year's budget request. I'm thinking of in terms of modifications. I heard that we want to maybe beef up anyway some of the marketing, and I guess I'm looking for maybe a little more feedback on that. But what I wanted to do is this isn't a vote on the budget type of thing, but I want to get this into the shape maybe by the next meeting of where you all feel this is the formal request we want to be making.
See, it's one of the challenges of the marketing is we don't know. I mean, we're going into new territory, right?
Right.
Okay. So I think we need to be cautiously generous in that regard initially.
Yeah, I would think
100%.
that, I would think that it's probably a figure double that based on my experience with, that is out there with print and radio and,
I was thinking minimum 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think given that some of it, yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. There's what this will look like if we don't get the CHIP grant and what it looks like if we do get the CHIP grant, bottom line.
At what point do we know that? When is that cycle?
That is a
Well, no.
good question.
We'll find out December, the
That's right.
first
Stroll
weekend,
weekend.
stroll
Oh.
weekend.
For next year?
Yeah,
Oh, good.
yeah, we get, that's
that's not that
the
far away.
the ceremony, and they give us the check. If we
Or
get it.
not?
Or not. Or it's not quite the check we wanted.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is pretty much the most likely
So
scenario.
is it possible to do, at the next meeting, have sort of a contingent,
A
to
budget that-
approve, that whatever amount we don't receive out of that housing hub and
Yeah.
that gets then put into our annual budget request.
Right. I think,
In
and
lieu
that's,
of the grant.
and the CHIP award timing is good with regard to town administration and the select board finalizing their thinking in December, January about the budget
Yep.
for next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
my only other question is, so there's some discussion that will come up later in an effort to help the flow through of habitat.
Yeah.
And some land acquisition is in next year. I'm under the impression that 325 is intended for construction
Yes.
expenses.
Yes.
Is there more land necessary to help get through that 2-unit or third
Well,
that we should be considering or thinking of?
so that really is sort of reflected within that large land acquisition number.
Big number.
Down there,
Yeah,
okay, so,
yeah.
so it's just not broken into
Yeah.
that category?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Right, and in the FY '20, we have both the potential for acquiring the property for them to clear the waiting list and the funding that they need for construction, which is the 400.
Yeah.
So that bundle together gets those two families in their homes, and then everything else in FY 2021 to be shy listed.
Going forward. I just have a formatting comment. Can you
Yeah.
put the legend over here too or something on
Sure.
this side? It's just hard to, I keep going to this and it's hard
Yep.
to.
Yep.
Or 2 pieces of paper or something? I don't know. Thanks.
And back to your comment question about the short-term rental tax, I don't know that this is the place to do it, but maybe that's the conversation to convey to the Board of Selectmen in our request. That's their opportunity to allocate this funding that we're requesting
Into this bucket.
right into this bucket,
Right.
as it was intended by the
Right.
state when they wrote it.
Well, yeah, so if we're coming back with the revision, so if you're looking at this today, the way it's presented, the punchline basically is the trust has enough money on hand, assuming the town administration takes care of staffing needs, that to get through this next year
Right.
without additional funding. Except we have added,
Yeah.
let's say 50,000 of marketing related things, and we don't get the money from the CHIP program in that event. We are saying we need roughly 300 to be budgeted by the town to do what we want to do. So could that come from the short-term rental, wherever you want it comes from?
Right.
Yeah.
And CPC, I mean, those are both.
No, CPC cannot be
No.
used for operational expenses.
No, but I'm saying if we don't get a CPC grant, there's other program things in here that
True.
wouldn't be funded in 2021.
True. That's true.
So I just want to be clear that that's not
Gimme.
a gimme, assured.
Any more questions or comments?
No, good job.
Thank you very
Very
much.
clear.
Thank you, guys.
That was thorough.
Yeah, and thank you.
I know we're losing one member soon to Touch a Fairy, so I'd love to jump back to item number 5 and the covenant operation and hear your revised presentation, any commentary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Crispa from Housing Nantucket. Not much to report, just that I've been working with Tucker and Town Council to try to revise the application. Town Council obviously had some good input on how to make it more clear and official. One thing that I think was significant was perhaps we should lower the amount to $10,000 so that it was more, just looking at the costs, that might be more in line with what it actually might cost for a covenant creation, and then also it could extend the funds to reach more people. That's one thing. Other than that, I mean, really what you saw last time and heard, I'm willing to answer any questions about it, but from there,
I have a question.
Yes, Penny.
Yeah, how did we come up with, or how did you come up with the rate of 6%?
that I just throw out there. I don't know. I know we needed to check in with Brian Turbot, so I just looked at the internet and saw that that was like a number that people were using for short-term loans.
I think we're trying to pick a number that is an incentive to perform.
Without being punitive or usurious?
Yes. Yes.
I think it's high. I think it's high.
Is it too high? I mean,
Well, it's high in this environment at the moment
At the
today,
moment in time.
but 6 years ago that wasn't a high number.
Yeah, but we're not 6 years ago.
for an 18-month loan, though, I don't know if that's like, it's a short term. I think maybe you're thinking of the rate, but that's what I found. I mean, it could be anything you want. This is your program, but that's why I threw in 6%.
I just think we need to be, if the goal here is to help people and enable people to more easily create covenant properties.
Is there a legal amount we have to charge?
That's if they don't perform, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, right?
No,
Yeah, it's zero
a
interest
punitive-
if they
It's
perform.
0 up to 18 months.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
after 18
Payback.
months, it would be a 6%
okay.
charge. Now, we'll talk more
Yeah.
in an update about
Just my-
47 fairgrounds in a minute.
My opinion.
And it's not punitive enough, and that situation has
Good point.
been ongoing for years.
Okay.
And so we're in a situation that it's not. Like, I would encourage a number, or prime plus a number of 4%.
I'd like to see it
So if-
tied into indexed with something.
So then that way, as the environment, I think we all have to
Can
assume
justify it.
interest rates are going to change, right? So is it 4 plus prime or something along that line?
I would just recommend having a defined number, and each year it could be reviewed
Yeah,
relative to
that's-
what happened. But
Yep.
to have to go back in the future and
Calculated
Yeah, that's a
as
good
it's
point,
adjusting.
yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, I
To be
also,
reviewed annually.
yeah, I also think that from someone who's looking at possibly participating, I think knowing exactly what they're getting into,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
that's a
check
good
what the rates are.
Yeah.
I think keeping it simple will also increase uptake.
And the event that triggers this is non-compliance with, so it really is sort of punitive. I mean,
Right.
okay. All right, well, let it rip. I mean, let's it fast.
Well, and I agree. I think it has to be a number that is more than it would cost to go borrow the money at a
Yep.
bank.
Yep, understood.
well, and
Like a
with-
hard
To
money
repay
loan's
it.
11%.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the things that town council we talked about is that so I mean one of the concerns is just like with your fiduciary hat on, how do we ensure that these public funds are being managed to
Yep.
the best possible way. So with this, someone who comes in, applies, wants to do the program, my understanding, town council's recommendation, so there would be a lien that's recorded on the property at the start.
Secured.
So that sort of is an incentive as well to address the program. It is because the covenant does not get recorded till the very
Sale.
Till the
end
sale,
of the
yeah.
process.
But this gets satisfied at sale or transfer.
Exactly.
So they can't do this. I mean, they pay us when they sell.
Right.
Well, they're paying us when we sell, and that sort of gets to the point that Ann brought up about the 10,000 versus the 15,000.
Yep.
Like most attorneys expect to get paid at a closing,
Yeah, of course.
and so if you look at the anticipated cost for this, they're under 10. So does it make sense to just disperse the 10? And in the rare instance where someone needs to come back to say, I need to pay my attorney, we're not finishing within a reasonable time frame, that could, there an additional award of 5 or what have you could be done at that point. But it just feels like if 95% of the time you're not going to need those funds, why disperse them?
Also, as Ann points out, enables us to serve more people
Exactly.
and create more covenant properties.
Exactly.
Do we need to have the time frame for which the interest accrues? As in, isn't that how it works sometimes, where it's yearly or monthly or something like that?
Oh, how
It
it's
says,
compounded?
yeah, it says
or-
per terms defined in the promissory note right
Oh,
now.
okay, so that will define that. My other question too, and again, in light of Tucker, now what you know about 47 Fairgrounds, are we protected in terms of any signatures needed? Just making sure that everything happens at once and we're not waiting. I think,
It's a great question.
being, not being held up.
I will double, so town council obviously has reviewed this. If you all decided to move this forward today with any revisions you think are appropriate, he'd like to do a final review, and I'll ask that question, but my understanding is this protects us.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can't force the hand of someone to finish the transaction, but these interest accruals and the lien and so forth are fairly strong incentives. Yeah.
I have a question. I think one of the biggest expenses in creating these lots that's not addressed at all in this assistance is creating new well and septic on a lot that isn't on town sewer, town water. So it might be good to keep it at 15, just because I know, those costs are onerous. Or would they be able to get bank loans or mortgages or something to help with that? I mean,
You're talking about septic design.
Yeah,
yeah, design and installation and drilling a new well, because,
I think that's gonna be more than the extra, or
but it
Yeah,
just
there
would
would be
give
some-
them a little help.
I mean, we can't afford to throw out the money for them to
No,
install.
not the whole thing, but I mean, I'm just saying, if we kept it at 15,
I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't covered in here as a possible expense, but I know that, in the lots that are more in the country district.
it's interesting because the language says solely for eligible costs to create a covenant lot as determined by Housing Nantucket. And Rita's absolutely right. Those are things that can be a huge financial stumbling block for people. Or maybe there's one septic and they have to allocate 1 or 2 bedrooms to one and 3 to the other.
I mean, just hearing about it, I agree that
Yeah.
that expense is very large. I think it's going to be more in the $50,000 range for a
Right.
loan,
No, I
which is not
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
this program's about. I think that that's something that we should look into. Eligible costs, that is a word that town council actually threw in there for us.
Yeah, it looks like
So just looking and thinking about it right now, I would not consider installation an eligible cost. I think the design would be an
Permitting.
eligible cost.
Go ahead, Brooke.
So, the determination of whether the lot is
Right.
creatable is in part due,
That's right.
based on if it's not on town sewer and water, it being determined that the septic and water can be brought or expanded or created.
And that's
So I
that
would
falls under
say,
an engineering expense, which is
Yeah.
Right.
part of the survey. So I would think that that's a reasonable expense, but I would stay away from
Installation.
hookups or
okay.
installation. I would rather carry that over to a new discussion
Yeah.
or agenda item where we're going to the Board of Selectmen for waiving fees
Yeah.
for sewer hookups
Right.
and potentially
So-
helping to fund septic
It's a really good
all
point, though.
together
Yeah.
versus confuse the two.
And
Kind of
I
have them as
think we should still keep it at 10 and make them come back, because that's gonna leave more funds in the pot
Okay.
I agree.
instead of just writing the 15.
And the way it's written, it says loans will not exceed 15,000.
Yeah,
the
so
way it's
give them 10 and they can come back, and then we can keep as much at least in the pot for
It's,
other
it's
people.
interesting. I was just doing some research today, and of the last 6 covenant houses that sold, half of them were on well and septic.
interesting.
And I would have
Yeah.
thought it was much less than that, fewer than that.
I would think that would be the general area that there's opportunity and density that people want to see, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the rural districts. So,
I think in the name of being a pilot project, I think, again, if this becomes a major stumbling block, I think we will find that out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And what that costs.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I also think, I'm not quite sure who just said it, but I think we would want them to have already determined that they can do the well and the septic before they go and
Yeah.
have funds to do any design.
That's-
Because then if they find out that they couldn't do it, then that would be money they're not gonna get back. So I think keeping it a little more restricted to start, and then based on the feedback you're getting, looking at opening it up again. If needed. So that would be my tendency.
yes, Brooke.
my other comment is that isn't that installation of septic, that's borne by the person who ends up building the house as part of a construction loan. So it's sort of, it's not really part of the lot creation, it's part of the construction, so it's a different step in
But
the
the
process.
engineering to make
Typically.
sure it's feasible
Right.
needs to happen.
Again, I don't, I feel like there's a determination if it's feasible before, and then there's the actual design of the
Yeah,
system.
I mean, they'll have to perk test right before
Yeah.
and make sure it works and then design the system.
Yeah.
But that's part of the whole engineering package. The-
I guess I would just want them to make sure they can do it again before spending money on something and then saying, oh, we can't do it, but we spent $2,000
Right.
seeing if we could, and now we don't really want to pay it back, but, because we can't create the covenant. But I don't know enough about the steps
Ouch.
involved. I guess that's the thing, is I would want them to know that they could do it, and then if they need the money to actually design it. But
Sometimes
I
you
don't know
have-
enough about the process.
Sometimes you have to go through the process to determine
In
if
order
you
to
can
do
do
it.
it.
And this is a loan, so they are incentivized to be efficient about what steps to take, when, and when to take them.
And how, it's a pilot program, so how many are we, what was the number?
That's
again?
that's one thing I wanted to confirm today. I believe at the last meeting, you all were considering allocating, basically, $100,000
what I thought.
toward,
Okay.
this program, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, but 10 would go toward like marketing and promotion of the program, and then 90 would really be reserved for the applicants.
First come, first served?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's- One
Okay.
quick question I have to go.
that
So
right, Rob?
when, let's say there's a covenant lot on the market. For them to sell that lot, they have to know whether it's
Buildable.
buildable.
Yeah,
Okay.
and sometimes that due diligence falls on
The
Yeah,
buyer.
that's right.
or the buyer to confirm it. So
Okay.
in theory, there's most of the time the engineer can gut check.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a
He knows the neighborhood. He's
knows the
engineered
neighborhood,
before. He
the-
knows
the
what's
soil
up. Yeah.
content,
Yeah.
knows the permeability, and then can kind of give an idea when drawing the secondary lot
Yeah.
to come to planning board.
I'm sorry, guys. I've got to run.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. See you next time. Yeah.
Trap?
Fun.
So today we would be looking at a motion to approve the program as written with the funding up to $100,000, noting that $10,000 will be used for program creation and marketing of the program by Housing Nantucket, with $90,000 for first come, first served. Is there more questions or comments?
Just that we should say it's a pilot program.
Yeah, and you'd be, applicants would be awarded 10,000 through Housing Nantucket initially, with the opportunity to come back for up to an additional 5. But as Dave said, after coming and talking about it, as well, your approval of it is subject to a final review of the documentation by the town council.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
great.
for your
This
work
is
on
exciting.
it.
Thank you, Ann.
And then, of course, we'll be coming to you when we get the application, so you'll be kept abreast of what the progress of this program is.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, and put a lot of work into
It's great.
developing it.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
And a great resource for you as you set up the marketing thing will be NARAB, so any way that we can help distribute that information.
Super. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, that moves us down to item number 7, update regarding 47 Fairgrounds. Who wants to take the lead on that?
Not me.
I will. And just stop me, because we did meet in executive session, but I don't think, in case there's anything that I'm going too far, but the board met in executive session on Thursday to discuss, and we had, for review, we had emails and information presented to us by the homeowner, and then myself and Dawn had met with her once, and then I met with her again 2 weeks ago, just before. And the board did vote unanimously to continue with the existing conditions on the original MOU. So one of the concerns had been by the homeowner was that in order to create the covenant lot, that the existing driveway would have to be moved and that there'd be 2 curb cuts. And we essentially went back to her and said, the existing conditions of the MOU remain, but that driveway does not need to be moved. So I believe there's some sort of easement arrangement. So that's a cost savings. It will be a shared entrance, but again, doesn't have to be moved. So we have sent that on to the homeowner and are awaiting her response. We've given her 2 weeks to take that into consideration. And at this stage, if she's not willing to sign the land court document, then the board will have to look into legal counsel as to what the next steps are. I think as well, we did discuss, again, this may be a very unique situation, but if something like it comes up, or we can kind of see even in the covenant lot creation program, really looking at how to protect ourselves, our loan, from situations like this, and I think particularly, most likely when land court is involved, because that's such an unknown in terms of how long something might take. So we discussed things like looking into whether there's a possibility to essentially have, what was it, right of attorney?
Like a very limited power of attorney
Yeah.
granted at the time
Yeah.
for executing documents like this.
So that we're not waiting 3 years for any signatures that are needed in order to close something out. So that's where we stand. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rita.
Yeah.
You want to follow up with something?
Rita deserves extra pay for.
I'll make note of that. I'll put it into the budget.
Yeah, excellent.
50% of your current remuneration.
Yeah. Oh, I can get a couple extra coffees then.
Update regarding Neighborhood First. Would our city members like to give us an update from the last meeting? Or?
Shall I go?
Go for it.
Okay, as you know, we elected co-chairs, Peter Hoey and Doug Abbott.
Abby.
Abby, thank you. I knew I was going to do that. Apologies. And interestingly, Peter is one of the year-round representatives, and Doug is one of the seasonal representatives. And we had our first meeting after the sort of procedural meeting, so really our second meeting, wherein we were trying to establish criteria, and the co-chairs, along with some staff, had done research and provided a spreadsheet showing sort of the different benefits of different models of scattered site construction, all in one big place, which didn't go over very well. I'm going to offer an opinion on that. And there was a robust discussion, I would say, and some members were particularly concerned about massing and density. And we just feel there's a need in this community to be sensitive to that going forward. And that's pretty much my take on it. Did I miss something?
Yeah, I mean, I would phrase that as being sensitive to site appropriateness.
Exactly.
For different type of use of the funding. And bearing in mind that scattered site is part of the intent, along with bearing in mind the relative cost of individual housing units spread out all over relative to more concentrated construction, and so just really evaluating the pros and cons of the different directions, and I think making sure that we're as transparent and open as possible in our process and how we arrive at the conclusions, the recommendations that we'll bring to this board at the end of the year, beginning of next year. So I would say we have a good first start and much more conversation and assessment and debate to come.
So really the challenge is to house the largest number of households in a way that's tailored to Nantucket.
Well said.
Ken, did you want to address this?
Ken Bogren. I just want to make one other point, which I think is really very important. I think one of the most important things that has been done is there is a 4-page memo that tries to explain the problem that we're dealing with, because the problem is multifaceted. The problem is trying to understand how the SHI list works with our overall obligation relative to the 10%, relative to the timing of bringing properties on, and how to be able to stay out of 40B jail. So I think that the documentation that you have been working on, I think, is very close to a level of where it can be understood and then brought out to the entire community. And the idea would be to, in fact, have that be presented and perhaps even put an ad in the newspaper, so there's a great level of understanding of the entire community in terms of what's involved in this process, because it is not a simple process to understand. So I think that to my mind, is the first thing that we need to use, an organization need to do in terms of creating a level of understanding of the fact that it's a complicated process, and then secondly, that the steps that you're going to be taking subsequently to make that happen follows on. So
I think it's also maybe important to follow up, and maybe Tucker could address this, with research was done on to sort of
Sorry. Gary? Hi. No, I think you dialed the wrong extension. You've got the public meeting room. Sorry about that. Oh. You landed on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
they didn't cover this in class last week.
Gary, yeah.
We need a call in.
We're in a meeting.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So,
We'll catch up with you. I apologize, Gary. Bye-bye. Sorry.
you're so
Coastal
nice.
was-
Just
Oh, Coastal Lansing.
Yeah.
yeah, my point was that town council proffered an opinion on the interpretation of how the funds could be spent, and
Yeah, and
maybe you
that's-
could elaborate on that.
Well, sure. So I think they're in your packet, or the materials that Megan had.
They're part of the minutes.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So the Neighborhood First group, going into their work, wanted to understand, so what are the limitations and parameters of the use of these funds. And so in there is town council. I should say it is a collective opinion of town council, bond council, and the finance director, who's also the chief procurement officer for the town. So it is representative of their collective view in terms of the latitude, if you will, of the use of the funds. Yeah, I think more or less as Penny and Brooke have been getting at, I think there's a bit of a balancing that the committee is trying to incorporate in its work as to scatter as well as be efficient in the use of the capital in their recommendations.
And realistic.
Did those groups touch base on the under procurement, the price that the group is able to spend? I keep coming back to, is our ability only to spend up to an appraised figure?
And that question has been posed to town council. We're awaiting the answer, like under what circumstances could we go above if need be.
With these funds or any other funds
Yeah.
that we're spending from?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you. Any questions from the board for our members of Neighborhood First?
I'm just going to add on to what Ken was mentioning. I think it's the intention of the advisory committee that when this summary document is finalized, which I think it's anticipated to be at this next meeting, in terms of the current situation and the shy list, that it would be worthwhile to distribute this as broadly as possible, including maybe even paying to have it published, like kind of full page in the paper sort of thing, like something really out there that can be referred to. Again, it's really a statement of where we are and facts. Essentially, it's not getting into particular strategies of how to solve it.
Now, do you see the committee delivering this document to this board and this board doing the distribution, or would it be coming straight from the subcommittee?
I think it would probably be coming to you all, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you all have the budget to like take a ad out in the paper, that sort of thing.
Plan to have that as an agenda item for the
Yeah.
next meeting.
We could always create a press release and submit it to the paper with a press release as well.
Yeah, but I think this is, as well, yes. But I think we may want to ensure that it's stated in the words that the committee feels are the way to state it.
Let's plan on having it as an agenda item, and then we'll talk about how to distribute it once we've approved it.
And the graphics, I will say, go a long way towards making it easier to understand.
Could be a mailing.
Could be a mailing. Insert
It,
in the papers.
website, I mean, we really want to get it out there ultimately, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so hearing no more on neighborhood first, move to item 9, discussion of possible warrant articles. Do you have a preparation for?
Well, if we just kind of put it on here as a placeholder, I mean, there, as all of the boards are considering articles that they might want to put forward with respect to town meeting and so forth, we wanted to at least kind of bring up the discussion. There isn't anything in particular at this moment that we have drafted as a recommendation, but wanted to allow for the conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to actively speak to the planning board, because I know that they're working on some warrant articles that might impact the affordable housing landscape, and I would suggest that we open a dialogue. Dave's not here to answer this, but to make sure that we're in sync with what they're doing, because while I can't imagine anything that we would draft on our own, I can see us partnering with or voting to support something that, we think is in the interest of affordable housing in Nantucket that they're putting forward. So,
Are you suggesting a joint meeting or
maybe forming a little work group and asking them, maybe not a meeting of everybody, or a joint meeting. I don't know. I don't know what I'm suggesting.
You can, like the NPDC will endorse articles that the planning board or citizens articles have been put forth, and so you can do that, and that can be a document that's given to the planning board.
I think for our next meeting, we should ask Dave kind of for update
Yeah,
what
that's a
they're
good idea.
doing, and then is there any commentary direction we can offer our opinion to
Or
them?
involvement.
Yeah.
Can we make sure we ask him that now so he's ready for it?
Right,
Yeah.
in preemptively. Rita?
Yeah.
Rita?
Okay.
Do we need to do anything legislatively or home rule petition wise to up our covenant limit to 175% of AMI? Or is that something that we want to consider?
Waiting to see the
Yeah,
wheels
I'm
stop
looking at
spinning
that,
because
yeah.
we're moving fast.
Everybody's looking at you, Anne.
Yeah.
Or Ken, I thought you were looking at Ken.
We're
Both.
looking past Ken
You're
at
sort
you.
of right. Fine.
Surprise!
Ken went like this.
All right, let me answer that. So your question is, would legislation, first it would have to go to town meeting, it's a home rule petition.
Right.
So first, if that was something that the community felt was something we wanted to do. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about that. We have talked about that at Housing Nantucket. It's going to be difficult to do that because people who had purchased before, purchased at certain levels, there's certain criteria for the covenant program, and that's what you're buying into, this 150. The 175, you've got the workforce zones that are being built over there at Richmond Company, for example. But to me, that's a separate kind of program. I think that there need to be a lot more talk about, what would be involved in changing. I don't think you can just change that and up the incomes, because then your price points are going to all increase as well.
You also,
Your max sales prices and whatnot.
there would also be an impact on the people in the lower income levels because they would be competing with people in the higher income levels.
Yep. So there's all sorts of like ripple effects there that we would have to consider. We've talked about that, and our board has decided against changing the income criteria. But if we thought, and I do hear a need out there for the 175s and below, that's something that Housing Nantucket we're developing a 3-year strategic plan in the next couple of months, tied into our community investment plan, which is part of our CDC qualification. So basically, we're thinking about that and thinking about, is that something that we need to start zoning in on? So, that's a good way that we can start working together if you're hearing that in the community too.
Well, I knew that Richmond was having that section, and that we were talking about, is there a way that we can do closing cost assistance for them? But I think that we would have to amend our home rule petition on our covenant.
No,
I don't think so for
I don't
that.
think we, I
Okay,
don't think
all right.
we've already raised our limit
Oh, okay.
here to being able to support up to 175.
All right,
Oh, okay.
all right.
So
So
I
I just
think-
wasn't sure.
Yeah, I don't think we
was
need to
confused.
change that program, the 150 covenant program, but we may need to take a look at closing cost assistance and raise that limit from 150 to 175.
Okay.
Because right now, the agent who is approving those is Housing Nantucket. And so they're not necessarily looking at applications up to 175. So we'd have to figure out how we would want to vet those applications, but we could fund that,
All right, good.
is my understanding.
Yeah, and Housing Nantucket, Ann and I have spoken about, they very likely will be doing the qualifications for the 175 units.
The monitoring, we talked about
just
the
as
monitoring.
long as
I know that
we
the
have
Richmond
the
company, if you would like us to do the qualifications, that's something that we could do also.
Yeah.
But SEB is the entity from off island that the Richmond company has chosen to do their lottery and all of their income qualifications for the lotteries that they have going now.
So if we do it, if we have applications for the 175 units at Richmond, we just have to determine what qualification documents would be required with that application. And if SEB is doing the income qualification, then that would be the requirement that they would have to show that SEB qualified them.
Right, but I think after SEB is kind of here for this initial lottery thing, so that any future turnover of a 175 unit, we would probably be working with Housing Nantucket on qualifying that party at that time and so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
Any more warrant article concepts to kind of kick around while we're hearing none? We'll move on to other business. The date of the next meeting. Tuesday, October 15th.
The only thing under other business, I guess I'll mention is, and I'll circulate, but Provincetown has initiated a buy down program for buying down units to the 100% AMI level. They offer up to $175,000 to the homeowner or buyer toward that end. Obviously, the unit would not count on their SHI list. It's probably less of a concern for them. They're at 9.8%. But I just mentioned it, and maybe, you know, one of the strategies that the Neighborhood First group is looking at is some kind of buy down, but still being formulated.
Great.
Yeah.
Any public comment? Hearing none? Board comment? Okay. I'm looking for a motion.
I move that we close the open session.
Oh, sorry.
Wait.
Did you say board comments?
Yes, board
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at October.
Okay.
I did just have one comment, and I can't remember for the life of me if you have already done it sometimes, but I'm just wondering if having Tucker present the budget to the select board would be beneficial.
Yeah.
And a comment on some of the things that we've discussed, like the neighborhood first and the covenant lot creation, just keeping the board updated with the things that we've been working on more than what I can do in select board comments.
No, I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to be seeing Libby this afternoon, and
Yeah.
you know, plan to talk a little bit about it with her following this meeting. So yes, I'd be happy
Great.
to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful so that the board can see, particularly sort of for the ongoing funding, the development of an office, so it would be similar to what other department heads do. I think it would be fantastic in the next month or two before
Anytime.
warrant articles. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for taking that on, Tucker.
Tucker, one more thing for you, we didn't address under the budget discussion, and I know it's something you wanted to address, was the authorization.
Yeah,
For
we'll try.
spending. Is
I
that
think we're
gonna be
talking the executive session
Okay.
about that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now I'm looking for a motion on item number 13.
Okay, so let me see if I get this right. I move that we close the open session to go into executive session, not to return to open session, for matters to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body.
Second.
So I'll
Roll
take
call.
a roll call, starting on this end of the table.
Hi, Charity Grace Mofson.
I, Brooke Moore.
Hi, Brian Sullivan.
I, Rita Higgins.
Hi, Penny Dye.
Irene Sherry.
Great. So we will take